the exhibits and keep the record open for a week in case you want to submit anything further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
The U.S. Senate continues work today on the immigration bill. Now to the Senate floor on C-SPAN 2.
Let us pray. O God, who inhabits eternity, help us to honor your name. Today, inspire our senators to do your will. May they remember that life is a rehearsal, a pilgrimage, and a time of testing. Remind them, therefore, of their accountability to you, and that you will bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Lord, enable them to be in the world, but not of it, as they understand the vanity of the temporal and the glory of the eternal. May gratitude to you be the motive for their work as they make a renewed commitment to excellence in everything they do and say. We pray in your righteous name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, if any, the Senate will resume consideration of the immigration bill. Mr. President, we finished here late last night. We had a lot of issues that were unresolved then. We have just a couple this morning, and we hope we can resolve those very quickly. So I certainly hope that's the case. I'm going to ask a consent agreement that will put us into some activity here for the next several hours, but I hope we don't need to use all this time. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the time until 2:30 this afternoon be for debate only, with time equally divided and controlled between two senators or the designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, with the exception of Senator Sessions, who will control up to 2 hours, and that at 2:30 I be recognized. And further, Mr. President, I would ask that consent be approved by the body.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, yeah, Senator Sessions has always been very courteous to me, and if I have some agreement that we have as to that amendment, I'm certain he would let me be recognized. But if he doesn't, I'll wait for the 2 hours. So we're going to, until he uses the 2 hours. So we're going to try to wrap this up very quickly, but very quickly in Senate time sometimes is not like everybody else's time. So we'll do the best we can and move as quickly as possible. I would note the absent quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Time is equally divided, and I would suggest that if any roll call, I would ask consent that the quorum call be terminated.
Without objection, so ordered.
I would further ask that my consent agreement be modified to the extent that if someone suggests absence of quorum, it would be charged equally against both sides.
Without objection, so ordered.
Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. The Senate's in a quorum call waiting for a senator to come to the floor. Work continues today on the immigration bill. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said he's working on getting an agreement in place on amendment votes. In the meantime, senators have until 2:30 p.m. Eastern to talk about the immigration bill. At that time, Senator Reid may have an announcement on the bill's schedule. The measure increases border security and workplace enforcement, allows additional high and low-skilled workers into the country, and creates a 13-year path to citizenship for illegal immigrants. What's being called the Border Surge Amendment was announced yesterday. It doubles the U.S. Border Patrol, adding 20,000 new agents, requires 700 more miles of border fence, and increases high-tech enforcement tools such as drones, camera towers, and mobile surveillance systems. Senate Leader Harry Reid has warned members they could be working on the measure over the weekend. He wants a final vote on the measure by the end of next week. While we wait in this quorum call, we're going to show you a portion of yesterday's debate when Louisiana Senator Mary Landrieu expressed her concern that major amendments will overshadow smaller amendments, causing them to be lost in the shuffle.
Thank you, Mr. President. I came to the floor to speak about and follow up about a 2-hour debate that we had last night on the floor about amendments pending to this bill that are uncontested. But before I do, let me just acknowledge the leadership for allowing Senator Toomey to come to the floor and offer his amendment. It's not one, although he's made some good points that I can agree with or others will agree with, but at least he had the opportunity.
The leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, Senate will resume consideration of S-744, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 80, S-744, a bill to provide for comprehensive immigration reform and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 2:30 p.m. will be for debate only, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, and with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, except that the senator from Alabama, Mr. Sessions, will control up to 2 hours.
Madam President, I thank you for getting us started this morning. To me, it's rather astonishing the extent to which we are discussing this historic immigration bill and how little our focus has been on the real impact of it, what immigration means, how to make it better, how to serve the national interest, to do the kind of things that the American people want us to do. We really talked about a lot of the hot-button issues, but we've not focused on the substance of what we're doing, how many people the country can absorb legally every year. We do 1 million legally now. How much more of that, how many more can we assimilate effectively, have reasonable expectations that they would find good work in America, to be able to have them find work but not put Americans out of work? What kind of skill sets do we need most? Will our system of enforcement work? And many other questions like that. So I would say to some degree we've missed that discussion. We're told today, now we're going on 11 o'clock, that we still will see today a magic amendment, the amendment that fixes everything, that we can just relax and go home and take a good nap because we've got an amendment that's going to fix all the problems in the legislation. Well, that's odd, because we were told when the bill was announced that it was the toughest legislation ever, and it fixed everything. It didn't need any improvement. We're all okay with it. You should just all pass it, and if you raise questions about it, as I did, then you're not a good fellow. That you're not being nice. That if you point out problems, so apparently now the sponsors of the bill have realized that they've got a lot of problems. And that as the bill has been examined and actually read, the 1,000 pages of it here, and it's been read and studied, more and more and more problems have been found with it. Now we've had a great deal of discussion about the border. The border security issue is a very, very important issue, but it's one of the issues in establishing a good, lawful immigration system that serves the national interest. It's just one of the issues. And it was nothing like the bill sponsors promised. It would not have accomplished the job. And those of us who were asking the tough questions and people tried to dismiss the concerns, finally had to deal with the issue that it didn't do what they promised. It's a big problem. So now they've accepted legislation, it appears, that would change the matter quite a bit, at least with regard to the border, because that was talked about a lot, because it's always symbolized whether or not we're serious about enforcement, and it was so weak in the legislation. So when the bill first started, they proposed to spend $6.5 billion on border security. Then, as it went through committee and complaints arose, they went up to 8.3, about a 30% increase. And then the bill hit the floor, and the American people began to find out how weak it was, and our phones started ringing. In almost panic, it seems, a group is met in secret, and they have announced the Corker-Hoven agreement to spend $38 billion to add 20,000 agents. And now it's all fixed. Vote for the bill now. You got no excuse. You have to vote for the bill. But if you're holding a bucket of water and it's got a bunch of holes in it, and you close one of the holes, all the water's still going to run out of the bucket. There are other problems with the legislation. This was just one that was so dramatic and so plainly contrary to the promises that the sponsors had made for their bill that it was really devastating, and now in total retreat and capitulation, they've talked about adding 20,000 agents and spending $38 billion on the border, because we don't want to hear you guys complain anymore. Now you just hush and pass our bill. Don't talk about what else is in it. Don't talk about the policy issues that are raised by the legal flow of immigration that we have. You just passed the bill now because we answered the border security problem. Well, this is not the way it's going to be. I hope, I will say this, you should be able to do dramatic things and effective things at the border with $38 billion. But as I'll point out in a little bit, we're not sure at all that that's going to happen in an effective, smart way, especially when it's come up in this fashion, and especially since we've passed laws repeatedly that plainly require certain things to happen, and then they never happen, like fencing. We said last time we passed a bill to build 700 miles of double-layer fencing. Well, that was in 2008, I believe. Today, we've got 36 miles of double-layer fencing, about 300 miles of pedestrian fencing. So now they say they've got their 700 miles. Well, it remains to be seen if that will ever happen, number one. But number two, it's not double wide, as we passed in law previously that never happened. It's just a single-layered fence, which is much easier to penetrate. A double fence system with a vehicular ability to move between the fences is very, very effective. It is proven effective before. That's why it was put in the bill, not because somebody wanted to sound tough, because it will work. And things that really work tend to be blocked in this Senate. Things that would actually make the system transform from illegality to legality have always been blocked, in my experience, since I've been in the Senate. It's just amazing to me to that regard. So we haven't seen the amendment. We were told we'd have it last night at 6 o'clock. We were on track to have a series of amendments last night voted on. Some important amendments to be voted on. And we were getting ready to do that. And all of a sudden, it was announced that an agreement had been reached and a new bill had been offered, a new amendment. And this amendment was going to fix the border. And it's going to spend more money than ever. And nobody now had any right to complain about the immigration bill before us. That's 744. We had it fixed. And those amendments evaporated. No votes were cast on them. Actually, the night before, a tentative agreement had been reached to vote on as many as 16 amendments. That would have been a nice start to begin to discuss, allow people to point out that there's a weakness in the bill and propose a solution to fix it. And that's the way legislation is supposed to go. You bring forth an amendment. You say this bill lacks this. This amendment in the bill is wrong. I've got a fix for it. This is my offer. This is my amendment. That's the way good legislation should be processed in the Senate. And that was all stopped. So we waited 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. I think it was 10:30 when we departed. Still no magic amendment that's going to fix every problem with the legislation. No magic amendment. Now, here we are at 11 o'clock, and we still haven't seen it. So, frankly, I'd like to read it. I am going to read it. We read this one. It didn't do what the sponsors said. They had good talking points. I could have voted for the talking points. I liked what they said, basically, in the talking points. But it wasn't in the bill. That's the problem. You know, I've been a federal prosecutor for many years. It's the law that gets enforced, not some senator's talking point. That's worthless. It's what's in the bill. It requires and directs agents to do this and that. It requires judges to do this and that. It requires law enforcement officers to do this and that. That's what counts, is what's in that bill. So with regard to this new amendment, I'd like to ask a couple of things to the Senators Hoeven and Corker. Does your amendment put enforcement before the legality? Does it put enforcement before amnesty, before the first legalization is allowed to occur? Or is the amnesty still first? They told us initially that they were going to have enforcement first. By a 4-to-1 margin, the American people have said they are prepared to treat compassionately people who've entered the country illegally, who've been here a long time and done otherwise right things. And we're prepared to be compassionate and deal with them. But we don't trust Washington. We want to see you do the enforcement before you go and give this legal status, this amnesty. That's common sense. There's nothing wrong with that. The American people aren't mean-spirited when they say that. They've seen this game before. They've seen how it's been played before. They don't have confidence in us. And I can cite example after example after example after example of laws, rules, promises made, never carried out. And that's why we have such a massive illegal flow into America, and how we've accumulated 11 million people. Many of them wonderful people. But this isn't the way we want the system to work. So I think that's the question. Do we have amnesty first again? And Senator Grassley, our ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, has repeatedly said, I was here in '86, I voted for the amnesty in '86, I thought it was going to work, and it was a mistake. We should have seen it was not going to work. We had the amnesty first. We promised to do all kinds of enforcement in the future, and that never happened. And this is why we're at this spot again today. That's the history of it. Well, what about this fencing as promised in the bill? Does the amendment require any fence to be built before the amnesty is granted? I'd like to know that when we see your amendment. We have any confidence that we'll ever see the fence built any more than we saw it when we passed laws previously to build fences that never occurred? Does your amendment require a biometric exit system as required by current law? Under current law, the Congress of the United States has required that the executive branch create an entry-exit visa system that's biometric. That basically means you use your fingerprints and your fingerprint read, so you can't just bring in a document to say I'm John Doe and not be John Doe. You come into the country, your fingerprints are recorded. When you come out of the country, your fingerprints are recorded. You're clocked out like many companies do at the workplace. You put your card in and your time is accounted for. And we know when you came, when you left, did you overstay, or did you depart as required by law? Well, the current law says we will do that. You'll be fingerprinted when you enter, and that is done. That's done. We are fingerprinted when you enter the country. But what's never been done is the exit system when you depart the country. And every kind of excuse has been made for that, but the truth is there's no excuse for not doing that. So does this amendment fix that problem? And the experts tell us, and the Congressional Budget Office reported just a few days ago, that we're going to see an increase in visa overstays under this bill and the trends that we're facing. There's several reasons for that. One big one is the legal flow of workers into our country, guest workers that come to take jobs, work for certain periods of time will double. And CBO predicts that you're going to have an increase of the number of people who overstay their visas, and since we have no ability to clock in people when they come and when they depart, we don't have any idea, and it becomes unenforceable. I think they're exactly right about that. Right now, the visa system is responsible for 40% of illegal entries into the United States. Overstaying visas is 40%. I think we can expect, with the large increase in guest worker programs, I think we're going to see visas well over 50% in the future responsible for illegal entry into the country. So does this amendment fix that? Senator Hoeven and Corker? That's half of the problem, more than half of the problem, frankly, if this bill passes. I don't believe it's likely to do so. So current law said there shall be a biometric entry-exit at all land, sea, and airports. What does this bill say? The toughest bill ever, they say. Does it make that stronger? Does it fix the weakness in the current system? No. It says you have to have an electronic system, much weaker than biometric. It says that you have to have it only at air and sea ports, but not at land ports. So this bill is plainly weaker than current law. I'll ask this to the amendment sponsors. Does it actually have a mechanism to require those who receive the amnesty to pay back federal, state, and local taxes? Is that part of the deal? That's what's been touted for it. We've been told repeatedly they're going to pay back taxes. Let me tell you, it's not going to happen under this legislation. There's no way this is going to even create an attempt by the IRS to go back and try to investigate persons to see who owes more taxes. That's just a talking point. That's a talking point. And talking points aren't law. Talking points aren't reality. They're political weapons used to advance the agenda of those who have an agenda. I would ask this question: does your amendment require those who receive amnesty to learn English? They say our bill requires people to learn English. But it really doesn't, as you can plainly tell if you read the legislation. Only by the time you've been here 10 years and you get a legal status immediately, you want to convert to permanent legal status, and you can do that for some within 5 years, some in 10. So at the end of 10 years, if you speak English, okay. If you're not speaking English and you are in a course, then they have to give you permanent legal status. You don't have to pass the course. All you got to do is in your 9th year, the 10th month, sign up for a course somewhere in English, and you get your legal status on the bill. So that's, would that loophole be fixed? Does the amendment, my colleagues, prohibit people with multiple DUIs from receiving amnesty? Do you do anything about that loophole? Does your amendment require that anyone applying for amnesty actually be interviewed? This is one of the big shocking weaknesses in the legislation. When a person is transformed from a person in illegal status to a RPI status, to legal status, which happens within a few months, when you're transformed to that, what do we do to make sure that person isn't a known criminal? That person could be a terrorist. What do we do about that? Normally, one of the most valuable things that can be done in these processes is to interview the person. Well, it appears quite plainly this bill, well, the bill certainly does not require interviews in what we're seeing now with regard to how Homeland Security is handling the DACA people. They're not interviewing them face-to-face. And it's a big weakness in the system. Nobody's even going to be interviewed face-to-face and actually examined to see if the paperwork they're submitting has any validity at all. Many times that meeting can identify a weakness in the paperwork and lead to further investigation. But if you don't have interviews and you otherwise aren't smart about how you administer it, large numbers of people can get status they don't deserve through utilizing fake documents. And we can expect that to happen. And it should not happen. We're being generous under this bill with regard to the people who would be given legal status, and they ought to, but only those who qualify should get it. People who don't qualify shouldn't get it, or we're perpetuating illegality again indefinitely into the future. Does the amendment prohibit those who've had domestic violence convictions from receiving the legal status? Not so in the bill today. Does the amendment ensure that those who do not receive amnesty would actually be deported in the future? A lot of people don't qualify. They should not have amnesty. You come and you find out they've been convicted of a felony, drug dealing, assault with intent to murder, robbery. Should they be given amnesty? No, you say, they shouldn't be given amnesty. Well, did they get to stay here if they're identified and found and arrested for some other crime? Shouldn't they be deported? We need to be sure that the persons are going to be deported who are here illegally. And I have an amendment that's a serious amendment that would help move us from this present failed system to one that could actually work to deal with internal enforcement and deportation in a proper manner. Well, I noticed, Madam President, a letter that just came in June 19th addressed to Senator Corker and Hoeven from the National Immigration Customs and Enforcement Council of the American Federation of Government Employees, signed by Mr. Chris Crane, their very able, competent president. This is what Mr. Crane said. He's writing on behalf of the 7,600 agents and officers. Quote, according to the National Journal, you're working on an amendment to the Gang of Eight bill. Your amendment is to help pass the bill. Quote, I am concerned that your amendment, as outlined in the article, not only provides immediate legalization before enforcement, but also appears completely to neglect interior enforcement. 744 drastically reduces the ability of ICE officers to do their jobs while providing legal status to convicted criminals, including gang members, drunk drivers, and sex offenders. I can assure you, these are not the types of reforms sought by the American public. In fact, these are not reforms at all, but instead provisions written by special interest groups concerned only with their own political agenda and future financial gains, close quote. Now, this is a man that heads the Law Officers Association, who's had his officers blocked from enforcing the law by political directives from the supervisors. That's a plain fact. They have negated the ability of the law of America to be enforced. He goes on. Any plan is doomed to fail that does not empower ICE agents to enforce the laws enacted by Congress, and that does not put an end to the unlawful abuse of prosecutorial discretion by political appointees, close quote. There's some history to this. The ICE officers are just in an uproar. The morale of the ICE officers was ranked near the absolute bottom of 170-something government agencies. They're out there risking their lives, dealing with criminals and people in violation of the law. And what do they hear from their political supervisors? Don't enforce the law. Don't follow through on what you're required to do by congressional action. So they have actually filed a lawsuit against their supervisors because they're being told by the supervisors not to do what they took an oath to do, which is to enforce the law. Mr. Crane goes on to say this, yet instead of cracking down on the administration's abuse of power, 744 places unprecedented new restrictions on interior enforcement, making the current situation much worse and much more hazardous. It is as if S-744 were explicitly written to handcuff law enforcement officers, binding their hands while giving virtually unchecked authority to executive branch officials to prevent future removals, including removal of criminal aliens, close quote. These are the people doing the job every day. They were never talked to. They asked to meet with the Gang of Eight. No, they didn't want to hear from them. The Gang of Eight wanted to hear from their special friends. They wanted to hear from the special business groups who wanted cheap labor. They wanted to hear from big labor. They wanted to hear from La Raza. They wanted to hear from special interest groups, and they heard from them. Chamber of Commerce and ag industrial groups. That's who met with them. That's who wrote the bill. That, and along with the Immigration Lawyers Association, who I will assure you have put in place after place after place in this bill, where now they can file cases, appeals, and create disorder within the normal operating system of immigration. Mr. Crane goes on to say, absent drastic improvements to the interior enforcement provisions, there is no doubt that S-744 will undermine the constitutional rule of law, guarantee future illegal immigration, and place the public at risk, close quote. That is a dramatic statement, and I've not seen it anywhere close to being refuted. And as to the question, does it guarantee future illegal immigration? Look, the Congressional Budget Office, they did the report for us. They're nonpartisan. They serve all of us. We've got a Democratic Senate majority. Mr. Elmendorf was picked by them, but he's a fair man. He said we'd only see a 25% reduction in the number of illegal entries into America if this bill is passed. They promised us we was going to end the illegality. It's going to be the toughest bill ever. The Congressional Budget Office this week said this legislation will reduce illegality only by 25%. That's just not acceptable. That's not acceptable. We've been told so much different, and Mr. Chris Crane says the same thing. Goes on to say this, S-744 not only fails to contain needed interior enforcement provisions, but weakens interior enforcement, weakens it. This is because powerful special interests involved in crafting the bill's language are opposed to interior enforcement, a fact ICE officers are all too familiar with. The political agendas of these groups place the public safety and security of our nation at risk. I believe he's accurate. I know he cares about what he's doing. Mr. Crane is a very impressive young leader, Marine. He loves his country. He believes this bill is bad for America, and he's had the courage to state that, and his association has backed him up with it. Are they all in it together, I guess? Goes on to say this, quote, in addressing the sponsors of the amendment, as respected political leaders, I'm asking you both to work with me and others in Congress and law enforcement in ensuring that this bill puts the safety of America before powerful special interest, close quote. I think that's a very important letter. It cannot be that our colleagues can promote a piece of legislation as being the most effective improvement in history when our own officers who are out there trying to enforce the law say it makes it worse. That's really, really disappointing. Now, well, I wanted to kind of tease my colleagues a little bit about this amendment that we're still waiting to see. Hadn't appeared yet. Thought we were going to have it at 6 o'clock last night, then 7, then 8, then 9, then 10, then 10:30, and now it's 11 the next morning, 11:20. Still hadn't seen it. Presumably, it must be okay, though. It's going to fix everything we need to be concerned about. Senator Schumer, at the markup in Judiciary Committee, talking about enforcement, said this, quote, this was all about Senator Cornyn, our able senator from Texas, who offered an amendment in the markup in the Judiciary Committee to enhance enforcement at the border, do a lot of different things he thought were important, and add 5,000 new Border Patrol agents. So what did our colleagues who'd written the bill, the Gang of 8, who said they were going to stick together and fight off any amendment that had any significance to it, and they all rallied and fought off the Cornyn amendment too. Now, what did they say about Senator Cornyn's steps to make the legal system work better and to add some new agents to the border? Being a Texas senator, he's familiar with those issues. Senator Schumer said this, quote, just on the border alone, Senator McCain and I had an amendment a few months ago that spent, a few years ago rather, that spent about $600 to $800 million on the border, and effectiveness rate went up from 68 to 82. We spent much more than that, as much as $6.5 billion. In other words, they spend in this bill, they say $6.5 billion, as I told you earlier. This is what he goes on to say, quote, the border will be effectively closed. We believe with these expenditures in the way they will be done. Well, if he's going to spend a total on this bill of $6.5 million and effectively close the border, how is it that he's now supporting an amendment that would add 20,000 agents to the border? Because the bill's in trouble. They're in panic mode, I would suggest to you. A little later in the same markup, referring to the Border Patrol agents, he said this, quote, their numbers have gone way, way up, and most people think they're an adequate number, close quote. Well, that was just May 9th, a little over a month ago. He said they're an adequate number. We don't need any more border agents. And they attacked Senator Cornyn for having the temerity to suggest we needed 5,000 more. And now when the bill's in trouble, in panic mode, they come in with an amendment, I think, maybe we hadn't seen it yet, they claim we'll add 20,000 Border Patrol agents. Back in the markup on May 9th, quote, Senator Schumer, quote, look, our goal is to make the border much more secure, and we do it dramatically. Well, if it does all that, why do we need a new amendment? The point I'm making here, what I'm saying to you is our talking point of the bill sponsors have been positive, positive, positive throughout. They say the things that people want to hear. The question is, does our legislation do what people want done? That's the question. So back then he said, we're doing all you want. The border is effectively closed. We don't need any more agents. Senator Flake talking about Senator Cruz from Texas. He offered an amendment in judiciary on the border and ably did so. Senator Flake says this, we add in our legislation 3,500 new customs agents. That's at a cost of about $6 billion, 3,500. And what we're talking about here is tripling the Border Patrol. It's currently at about 21,000. Take it to 60,000. He's talking about the Cruz amendment. So 40,000 new agents. We're talking about $40 billion to do that. And I know it's sincere desire to put more resources at the border, but we have fiscal constraints at the markup on, and so he opposed it, one of the Gang of Eight members. And Senator Schumer at the markup said, quote, and so to simply for us to dictate when we are not experts to quadruple Border Patrol is, in my opinion, something that you might accuse me of throwing money at a problem without really knowing what effect it would be, close quote. So he goes on to say on the floor on June 11th, just a week or so ago, make no mistake, he's talking about this bill before the Hoeven-Corker Amendment had ever been dreamed of. He said, make no mistake, our border will be secured as a result of this bill. We appropriate $6.5 billion up front in this bill to bolster our security efforts. That is, in addition to the annual appropriations made for each year for border security. Well, must not have been accurate, huh? He said the bill is taken care of. And they got an adequate amount in the bill as it is. And it would add 20,000 more Border Patrol agents. Again, the point is, we get positive spin no matter what the circumstances are, because they are out to sell this bill. They're out to promote their creation. And they've lost sight of what it actually does, and really lost sight, in my opinion, the fundamental responsibility of important legislation. And that is not to achieve a political end, but to achieve a better America, to serve the national interest. And I'm going to continue to ask, does this bill serve the interest of the people of the United States of America? Not economically and not legally, in my opinion. Now, Senator McCain, on June 18th, it's the other day. But those who think we need more people, we do need more people to facilitate movement across our border. He said it's too slow. We want more people to come in quicker. But we have 21,000 Border Patrol. Today there are on the Arizona-Mexico, there are people sitting in vehicles in the heat. What we need is not more people, because we've gone. In 1986, we had 4,000 Border Patrol. to 21,000, but what we need is the technology that's been developed in the intervening years. So he said, what we need is not more people. What he means is we don't need more Border Patrol agents. We need some more technology. Well, that's what they said last time when they undermined the fence. Some of you remember the phrase they used then, well, we're going to create a virtual fence. We're going to create a high-tech fence. And we don't need to build those old fences. That's not good. We're going to take care of it with technology. And we spent, as Senator McCain said on the floor, I think it was $980 million on a virtual fence at our borders that utterly failed. We got nothing for it. And what else we didn't get? We didn't get the fence. We wasted $1 billion on a failed technology and didn't build the fence that was promised. And this is why the American people are not confident that anything politicians tell them about immigration particularly will ever happen. And the American people are right. Time and again, politicians have promised, and never delivered. And that's just a fact. Now, this bill and these statements say a lot, I think. With regard to Senator Cornyn's amendment that would add 5,000 agents and do some other thing, this is what Senator Schumer said back in the committee in May, this last month. And what we've learned, and it was hit home to me when Senator Flake and Senator McCain took me to Arizona portion of the border, it's vast. We have more people on the Border Patrol. What's the number? 21,000. I think it was triple what it was 5 years ago. But you can't have, if you want to have the whole federal budget, you guys figured out how you're going to spend and get that money, the whole federal budget on just the Border Patrol, you could probably have 100% operational control. So he was saying then, don't question our bill. It does all you need. We don't have the money to spend more on it. And now apparently he's trumpeting the great bipartisan agreement that would add 20,000 more Border Patrol people. Now maybe we need more Border Patrol, and we need to use technology, and we need to use fences wisely. But what we really need is a Secretary of Homeland Security who knows what they're doing and who's committed to ending the illegality and using every resource we have wisely to confront this illegality and end it. And if you'd had that the last 4 years, we would have had far more reduction in illegality on the border than we've seen. We would be in much better position to go to the American people and say, let's talk about amnesty now because we've proven we've made real progress here. But they've never wanted to do that. They've been listening to the voices out there and the political interest and the special interest. And they've not done it. And so now we have 11 million people. And what's their solution? Surrender to the illegality. Just give up. We'll just give amnesty to everybody here, and we'll pass a law, and we promise it'll fix things, and we don't really worry whether it does or not. And I can tell you it won't. It won't fix it. Well, there are a lot of things that are noteworthy, and I would like to talk about as we go forward in this legislation. One of them I think is interesting, and I'm just going to raise it because it's an issue we need to confront. You hear it a lot. People are talking like this out there. Bill O'Reilly's Talking Points memo is consistently a high-quality memo that has valuable insight that Americans would do well to listen to on a regular basis, I think. Very insightful individual. But in the regard that he made last night, I got a transcript of it, I think shows some of the misconceptions about the legislation that we simply have to correct. It's not sufficient to pass this legislation based on talking points on spend from the sponsors of the bill. We have to say, okay, does it really do that? And how does it do it? And can it be made better? And are there weaknesses? Okay, so this is what Bill O'Reilly said last night. Quote, Senator Rubio told me on the phone today that it would be at least 13 years, 13, before people in the country illegally right now could gain full legal working status, and even longer to achieve citizenship, close quote. We'll talk about that. So he goes on to say, Talking Points supports immigration reform, even though I well understand the new law will be somewhat chaotic and it will be a magnet for even more people to come here illegally, which is why we need stepped-up security. Well, let's go back to that first statement. It said that there would be at least 13 years before people in the country illegally right now could gain full legal working status. Not so. Not so at all. Not even close. Within a few months, everyone that applies for the RPI status, the provisional status, will be given a Social Security card and the right to go to work and be lawful in the country and cannot be deported unless they commit a serious crime. It's virtual immediately, not 13 years. And it says even longer to achieve citizenship. Well, that's not accurate either. It does take, this is how the citizenship and green card status works, the permanent legal status. So within months, everybody that qualifies under the 11 million will be given RPI provisional status virtually immediately. They'll be able to take any job in America, move anywhere they want to in America, displace workers in America, compete for jobs wherever. That's what will happen on the bill. But for about 2.5 million who are people who came here as young teenagers, the so-called dreamers, they get citizenship in 5 years. They'll have citizenship in 5 years. That's 2 million, 2.5 million. And certain ag workers, those individuals who are illegally here become permanent legal residents permanently. They get their legal right to work immediately, but in 5 years they get permanent legal status. And the other 8 to 10 million illegal immigrants would be eligible for green cards or legal permanent residence in 10 years, not 13. So there's an immediate amnesty that precedes all of this. The legal status and the right to work is immediate. It's not 13 years out there. And a large number of the person will be able to have citizenship within 5 years, 25% maybe. Will be getting that. So I think our people who are commenting about this need to get away from the spin of the sponsors and spin of those who invested in trying to pass the bill and get down to what the bill actually says. And that's very important. And the sponsors of the bill, Senator Schumer and others, claim that the bill is paid for and they've got all their money that needed to fund the legislation, and they claim this Congressional Budget Office report that came out the other day backs them up, but it does not back them up. I'm ranking member on the Budget Committee, and we need to talk about that in some detail because it's a very important matter. The CBO does not back that up. So it's just the CBO report shows this bill reducing deficits in the next decade according to the sponsors of the bill. But in fact, CBO plainly states on page 12 of the report that the legislation will increase on-budget deficits over that time. Increase deficits of the on-budget accounts. Why? Because the newly legalized immigrants will be paying some payroll taxes, will be paying the payroll taxes, the Social Security, FICA, Medicare taxes that withhold from workers' pay. But they're not drawing Social Security benefits at this time because most of them are younger than that, and they're not yet past 65. So that creates a surplus flow, right? Creates a surplus flow. Of the $459 billion in new taxes and fees, only about half of that comes from the income taxes that these workers are going to pay. Why? Because most of the workers are low-income workers. Over half of the people who are here illegally do not have a high school diploma, and they're just not making real high wages. And you have to make a pretty sizable wage before you pay any income tax, although you do pay your Social Security and Medicare withholding, the payroll tax. So the number, how do they then say they have money created to pay for all of this stuff? They count the money from the payroll taxes. Okay? That makes sense, you think, at first glance. Which by rights, though, belongs to the Social Security Trust Fund. That's not money available for the government to spend on trips to Africa or some summit somewhere or for Solyndras. That's Social Security money. Using this money to offset other spending is an accounting trick. It was used to pass Obamacare, and it's not right. So let's go back over that again. So the on-budget account, income tax coming in from the legalization, because some people that are legalized are going to pay more income tax. But there's a lot of expenses out there, too. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a direct payment, not a tax deduction, a direct welfare, means-tested payment to poorer workers. That is a big cost, and other costs. So the CBO says the income taxes that are paid will be less than the cost of the immigration, therefore adding $14 billion to the on-budget debt of America. But the sponsors of the bill, wanting to claim that their legislation pays for itself, says, but they're going to be paying Social Security and Medicare taxes. Therefore, we want to count that money, and that'll prove that we pay for the bill. Really? Aren't the individuals who are now given a Social Security number allowed to work and pay the payroll taxes? Aren't those taxes supposed to be put into a trust fund for their Social Security and Medicare benefits when they do get 65? Absolutely. And any surplus money that goes into Social Security and Medicare is not given to the United States Treasury to spend to pay for Border Control agents. That money is loaned by the Medicare trustees. It's loaned by the Social Security trustees. They get a Treasury bill in exchange for it. The U.S. government pays them interest on the money that Social Security loaned to them. It's their money. It's a trust fund. A lot of people try to deny that, but there really is one. There are actual debt instruments that show the transfer of this money, and interest payments are made by the U.S. Treasury. So you can't count the money that people pay into Social Security as being money that can be used to spend on other programs of the government. It's a really important issue. Mr. Elmendorf, the director of CBO, the night before the President's health care bill passed, I prevailed upon him to write a letter to explain that. And he wrote a letter and said, you can't simultaneously, what had happened in Obamacare was they cut Medicare benefits and provider costs and used that money to fund his new health care program and claimed that it strengthened Medicare because it reduced Medicare costs, and they claimed it provided money to fund Obamacare. And Mr. Elmendorf used a sentence that I thought was very powerful. I think I can recall it. He said, you can't simultaneously use the money to strengthen Medicare and pay for a new program. He used the phrase double counting, the kind of things people in business go to jail for. He said that's double counting the money. And this is exactly what's happened here. The money that goes to people's Social Security and Medicare trust fund accounts isn't enough now to pay for the amount of money the individual will claim when they become 65 and start retiring and using health care and Social Security checks every month. There's not enough now. So you can't claim that this is going to strengthen us and provide money. So I feel pretty strongly about that. Mr. President, I see no one else is here, but I will yield the floor at this time and reserve the balance of my time and note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.